Over the last few years, we've looked at a lot of audio-specific implementation techniques. But honestly, one of the best decisions that I've made for myself was to take a step back from audio and start learning as much as I could about other development pipelines, such as animations, rendering cinematics, visual effects, and so on. And in doing so, not only am I now better able to communicate with those different departments on a team that I might be working on, but I was able to take what I've learned and bring it back into the world of audio so that I can better tailor my sound design and my implementation to the needs of those different pipelines. So starting today, we're going to expand on the scope of what this channel has grown to be about. Now, I am the sound effects guy, so we will always find a way to bring it back to the world of audio, but moving forward, there may be some videos that are less audio specific and more audio adjacent, or looking at techniques and things that audio could potentially be a part of. And hopefully that'll make a little more sense after today's video, where we're going to be taking a look at the power of the public variable. So with that being said, let's get started. All right, so we're here in Unreal Engine, and I will mention that I'm currently using Unreal Engine version 5.5, but the version isn't necessary. This has been something that you could do as far back as I could remember when I started using Unreal Engine 10 years ago. And so I'm going to demonstrate this by setting up one of my favorite things in video games. Now, we have a little scene set up here, and albeit very basic, but one of the things that I've always liked in video games is, say we have this little cafe set up here. We've got a coffee maker and our drink cooler and a stove. And while this may not be additive to, the story or really the game itself, I've always liked the little Easter eggs where you could walk up to something and, press an action key and it will do something. And so in this tutorial, I am going to be using audio as the example, but you can definitely do this with a lot of other things. So what I want to do is I want to walk up to this coffee maker, and I want to hear the sound of it making coffee. And I want to hear the sound of a cooler door opening, and I want to hear the sound of something cooking on the stove. And right now, these are just static meshes. Static meshes are just 3D models that don't have any function to them. They're props for world building. And I'm going to start off by showing you essentially the wrong way to do this. So because these are static meshes and don't have any functions, we need to tie functions to them. And we're going to do that through blueprints. So in my content browser, I'm going to go ahead and right click, and we're going to create a blueprint actor. And I'm just going to call this BP underscore coffee maker. And we're going to go ahead and open this up. And what I can do from my content browser is I'm going to go into this hospitality pack that I grabbed off the marketplace. And coffee maker was under front of house. So we can go ahead and drag that in. So now we have a blueprint that contains the static mesh of a coffee pot, or a coffee maker, sorry. And we want the player to be able to interact with this when they're close to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a box collision. And just going to line this up a little better. And I'll move this forward. We don't really have a necessity to interact with it from the back, but we do want to be able to interact with it when the player is standing in front of it. So we'll go ahead and compile that. And now we're going to jump over to our event graph. And now we don't need our event tick. We do need our event play, and we're going to use the box collision for this. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this as well. And since we want our player to be able to use an action key when they're inside of the box. What we're going to do is we're going to pull off our event begin play here, and we are going to enable input. Now we do need to tell it which controller we're enabling the input from. So we'll go ahead and pull off here, and we're going to do get player controller. Usually after you type get, it automatically highlights it since that's the pin you're pulling off of. All right, and so now, since we have this set up, when the blueprint is spawned into the world, we now have the ability to utilize action input or keyboard input with these items. And so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab a reference to our box collision. And we can pull off here and do is overlapping actor. And what actor do we want to make sure is overlapping? Well, that's going to be our player. So we can go ahead and get player character. And this is going to allow us to essentially do a true false logic check and determine whether or not the player is overlapping that box. So we can pull off here, and we're going to do a branch. And the branch is what's going to allow us to do actions based on whether this is true or false. And what we're looking for is going to be that player input or that controller input. So for this tutorial, I'm going to use a keyboard event, and I'm going to put it on the letter E. Now, one of the things that we do want to make sure we're doing is unticking this consume input, because if we have multiple blueprints that are all looking for this, and this has consumed the input, those other blueprints will then not allow you to interact with them. So we're going to untick the consume input, and on press is when we want to do this logic check. And so if we're overlapping that box and we press this, it's going to be true. And now what do we want to do? Well, I want to make it play a coffee making sound. So I'm going to do play sound. And just for the tutorial, I'm going to do play sound 2D, just because I don't have any attenuation set up on my audio assets that I've already created. But you know, you can use play sound at location, or, you know, however you want to go about doing this based on whatever your project need is. And now I do already have the sound of a coffee maker. And so that's really it in terms of being an interactable. We'll go ahead and compile this, and I'm going to pull this out of the way, and we're going to delete that coffee maker. And now we're going to drag in this blueprint that we've made. So I can spin this 90 degrees. And now when I walk over here and interact with it, now we have the sound of some coffee being made. But if I'm outside that collision box, I'm pressing the E key and nothing is happening. And right about now, you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, well, you just showed us how to make an interactable object. Where are these public variables you were talking about? And they're going to come in right now. So yes, I've set up a blueprint for this coffee maker. Now, what about having the sound of the door opening on this cooler? Well, technically, I could come back into my content browser and I can do everything that I just did for the coffee maker, but for the cooler. But in a large scale game, I'm going to end up in a situation where I may have hundreds or even thousands of these interactable objects. And if I were to sit here and create a blueprint for every single interactable object, first and foremost, that would be insanely time consuming. Second of all, those extra files are going to add up, and the file size of your game is going to be larger than it needs to be. And so we're going to use the power of public variables to greatly reduce not only the time it takes you to complete these tasks of creating these interactable objects, but it's greatly going to cut down on the number of blueprints that you need to create. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the blueprint that we already made. And in my content browser, I am just going to close this just in case. And we're going to rename this. Instead of BP underscore coffee maker, I'm going to change the name of this to BP underscore interactable. And we'll go ahead and open this back up. And I'm going to start in my viewport. And I'm going to take that static mesh of the coffee maker and I'm going to delete it. And instead, I'm going to come up here to my components under add, and I'm just going to add a static mesh. And what this does is it creates an empty static mesh component inside your blueprint. So we can go ahead and compile that. And we're going to come back over here to our event graph. And now, instead of our play sound, I'm going to get rid of this. We're just going to go ahead and clear it on out. And I'm going to drag off here and I'm going to promote to a variable. So with our variable created, we're going to go ahead and click compile. And the next step you can do one of two ways. Either you can come over here to the details panel and you can tick the box for instance editable, or over here in your components section, you can click on this little I next to the variable that you've created. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this interaction sound. And we're going to compile that one more time and save it. And so I'm going to go ahead and move this off. And if you look now, the blueprint that we created, it doesn't have a static mesh. And if I were to walk in here and hit my E key, nothing happens. And so with this blueprint selected, now over here in our details panel, you're going to see that we have this section for interaction sound. Now I know that it's going to be my coffee maker, so I can go ahead and add that sound. And if I click on static mesh up here, you'll see that we have the static mesh and it is empty. And so I can go ahead and put in my coffee machine. And so now, if we look at this, it looks just like it did before. And it still performs just like it did before. And now, instead of having to create a separate blueprint for the drink cooler and then another one for our stove, what I can do is I'll just copy this. And so right now it looks like I've just have another coffee maker, but let's head back over to our details panel. So I know this is going to be my drink cooler. And so that's going to be my cooler door. And under static mesh, I can have the drinks fridge. And so now we technically have a blueprint that plays a cooler door sound and has the static mesh of a fridge. And so we can use our details panel to kind of make the adjustments that we need to make, including moving that static mesh around inside the blueprint. So if I click on my static mesh here, and then I go back over into my viewport, I can actually move that drink cooler, that static mesh, whatever it may be, around inside the blueprint without affecting anything inside this blueprint, even though they are copies. And so now we can go over to our collision box and we can make the adjustments that we need to make so that it fits this static mesh. Bring that out just a little further. And so now I didn't have to make a separate blueprint, but if I come in here, there's my coffee and my drink cooler. You know, it might have been a little quiet, but there's the sound of my drink cooler. And these are both the exact same blueprint. And so I'll do one more. Go ahead and make a copy of this, and we'll rotate it back around, and we'll use this for our stove. So under sound effects, now that I have the interaction sound as a public variable, there's my stove sound. I'll click on the static mesh, and I think this was a gas cooker. And so you can see in our viewport, we now have the correct static mesh. We know we have the correct sound because we put that in our public variable. And so now, again, we just make the adjustments that we need for our collision box. Move that over just a little bit and down. All right, and so just like before, we have our coffee maker. We have our drink cooler. And now we have a stove. And because we used this public variable for our interaction sound, we're now able to go from having potentially 3 different blueprints down to just a single one. And I want to reiterate, if you are working on a full-size game, you could potentially have hundreds and hundreds of these things. And being able to do this with just a single blueprint is going to make a big difference. Now you might be thinking, okay, these are interactable objects. I'm probably not going to have that many. But if you're working on a full-size game, I can tell you something that you probably are going to have a lot of, and that's doors. And we can do the exact same thing with doors. Now, I'm not going to make you sit through and watch me build this out like you did with the other blueprint. I do already have this built, and we're using in our viewport, we have, again, our box trigger and a static mesh. Doors are essentially just another form of interactable. And if we take a look at our event graph, I'm using the box. When we enter the box, it does a thing. When we leave the box, it reverses the thing. And that thing is the door opening. And now subsequently, we also have the door closing when you leave the box. And so I've gone ahead and I've created 2 different variables, and you can tell by the little eyeball icon that they are a public variable. And so I have one for our sound, the door opening, and another for the door closing. Go ahead and close this out, and I'll drag this blueprint in. And so you can see it's just the box collision and nothing else. So we do need to add that door. So we're going to come in here to our details panel. I can click on static mesh, and let's do the first one as a bathroom stall. Oh, no, I need the bathroom stall door. There we go. And we'll go back up to the root of that blueprint, and you can see those 2 public variables that I've created now. So I have a door open and a door close. So I have already created meta sounds for this. We have our door open and our door close. So now if I hit play and I walk up to this, we have the door open sound and the door close sound. And just like I did with the equipment over here, I'll go ahead and just copy this out. So it's definitely the same blueprint, but back in our details panel once more, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this to, let's just say, a normal door. And instead of using the bathroom door sounds, I'm going to do a generic door open. and we'll do our generic door close. And so if we hit play over here, we have the same blueprint, but different sounds and different doors. Alright guys, so that is going to wrap things up for this video, and hopefully you now kind of have a better understanding of what I mean by the broader scope of implementation videos. So if there is something that you'd like to see me cover, let me know in the comments, and make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so you never miss out on any future content. If you'd like to be a part of the Sound Effects Guide Discord server, you'll find a link in the description below. Until next time.